Hey everybody, it's Romania Black. I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait, no. I'm recording episode 17 of Vinland Saga. Episode 16 and 15 have yet to come out on Patreon and YouTube, but I couldn't wait after a cliffhanger like that. How was I supposed to? Thorkell's like on the verge of attacking all of them. Askeladd's trying to escape. My dog is clawing his way into the other side of the world and the carpet below my feet. How am I supposed to wait and see what happens? So yeah, I do have a few comments from episode 14 from YouTube before we start, but I could not wait. I was like, I gotta find out. I have to find out what's gonna happen to Askeladd. How's he getting out of this? What's gonna happen? Are they gonna stage a full-on mutiny? Bjorn seems like he's still on his side. Thorfinn is following to protect Knut. Ragnar's dead. Things are not looking good. I'm curious to know how they're getting out of this. So we'll find out, right? And we have like 8 episodes left. like 7 episodes left after this. We are with episode 18, episode 18 will be the mark, I feel, of when the 3rd act will start. So this is like the end of the 2nd act. I feel like if you're going by a 3-act structure, you would look at each a 24 episode season would be cut into 8 different episodes. The first 8 episodes would be act 1. The second 8 would be act 2, and then your final 8 would be act 3. So with this episode going into the next episode, we're transitioning into the final act, which makes sense. It all seems to work. We're getting Thorkell, and the battle here seems like getting to Gainsborough is the final act, right? It seems like that's the final battle of the season. So we'll see where that takes us. I don't know. So I have a few comments before we start, though. There's a lot of comments that people were like, oh, Romania doesn't like episode 14 because I didn't talk a lot about it. I did like episode 14. I did like it. There's not really been an episode I haven't liked of Vinland Saga. It's just, if you've not noticed, I tend to be an optimistic person. Episode 14 is not optimistic at all. It's pretty bleak and despairing. I like episode 14. It's just an odd episode. Odd does not mean bad, for the record. But odd means, by that standard, I mean, it was difficult to break it down and talk a long time about it because there's just not a lot to talk about. Yeah, we could go into a big philosophical religious discussion, but I didn't want to do that. But plot-wise, it's just kind of an odd episode because it's like you've been going on this road with the plot, and then episode 14 veers off to this pit stop for an episode, and then it gets back on track. So plot-wise, there's not really a lot to talk about. It's more philosophical and more establishing that, yeah, these protagonists we're following are not good people. So yeah, I mean, there was just not a whole lot of things to talk about, but like I said in that reaction, it's an episode I think I'm going to be referencing and that I have been referencing since, because everything kind of goes back to it. So it's an important episode, but yeah, somebody was like, Romania didn't like it, and I'm like, you don't know me! So you don't know my life. So no, I was like, I did like it. I just didn't have a lot. I'm not one of those reactors that I'm like, I have to talk for an hour about this show. No, I just talk, and whenever I'm done talking, I'm like, okay, so that's how long it took. Cool. So sometimes the reactions may be like 2 hours. Sometimes it may be an hour. I think that one was like 45 minutes. I just talk for however long I want to, and then I stop. So it's like I don't have a set time or agenda with that. So that was funny. Al Sora talked about how Askeladd's just leaving orphans left and right. Left Thorfinn an orphan. Well, not really. His mom's still around, but he killed his dad. Left Anne an orphan. Knut's now an orphan. Technically, Ragnar's gone. Askeladd's just not afraid to mow people down for his cause. That's just how he views things. Marlon Taurus talked about, was Anne really lucky surviving or not? And I think that's left us, the audience, like, should we consider her lucky that she lived to see another day? Or should we consider her unlucky that she survived while her entire family were slaughtered and she had to witness that? I guess it depends on your perspective, right? Killer Queen talked about how I questioned why Askeladd maybe didn't like priests. And Killer Queen 2000 noted that Askeladd is a man of action. And so maybe he views priests as just... I feel like that is a good point, that Askeladd would not like priests because priests rely on God to answer a lot of those questions. And Askeladd doesn't seem like he relies on anybody to answer his questions except himself. He's like, no, I'm a man of action. Let's do this now. I don't rely on anybody to give me the answers. And so I could see why he would have some disdain towards priests, because priests in general rely on God to answer the questions for them. So he's like, no, that's not good enough. And so I could definitely see that. A man of action and not a man of just waiting around for someone else to tell them what to do. Good point. And then finally, Ridesante talked in episode 14 about, I was talking about like Christianity and how it was being interpreted. And they were like, well, that's pretty common for medieval times. It kind of checks out. And I'm like, it's pretty common for now. I was like, it's funny because I am Christian, but I ascribe to a very non-secular version of it. And I very much have had friends from different sects of Christianity. I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of contradictions. There's a lot of, some I'm like, how are we interpreting this? So I do feel like a lot of times, sometimes Christianity and the religion, it gets caught up in the interpretation. And I'm like, that gets questionable, right? Because then it's adding someone's interpretation of another text. And as an English major, I can go into a whole thing with interpretation and translation, and we could be here all day. So I'm not going to do that. But yeah, I thought that was interesting when they were like, oh, that checks out for medieval times. I'm like, it checks out for now. It's like, yeah. I'm like, But yeah. My ascription to Christianity is the whole, we love everyone, not basing it off anybody's other beliefs or sexuality or thing like that. I'm not going to talk about it. Not going to even get into it. Nope, not doing it. But anyway, we are going to talk about episode 17 of Vinland Saga. I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty excited to get into this episode. I couldn't wait. I was like, you know what? Let's just do this. So I'm excited to see where this episode takes us. I'm a little nervous. Thorkell wants to see his playmate Thorfinn, who I'm sure is not wanting to see him at all. So how are they getting out of this? What's going to happen? It's a big old question mark. So let's find out, shall we? We're going to start episode 17 of Vinland Saga, and we are going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. This episode was great. Oh my God. Wow. It was great. Not only because of just the action was ridiculous. Just absolutely bonkers. Like Askeladd slicing a man in half with that big ass sword, which we haven't got answers about the sword, but I'm figuring that as we go through the rest of the season, we're going to get more answers. But man, Thorfinn. Thorfinn, this whole thing about the whole concept of this episode being called servant, being a slave to something, and both what Askeladd and Thorfinn are a slave to is all coming to the forefront, and it's absolutely wonderful. So I love this episode not only because the action was ridiculous, but because of the tie-ins with the characters and the comparisons, the parallels between Askeladd and Thorfinn are pretty engaging in this episode. And it's just Askeladd is our protagonist and Thorfinn is too. I feel like, I've been making the joke about Thorfinn and Canute being like in a BL relationship, but Thorfinn just was like, peace out, Canute. Canute like gets yeeted off the sled and like flies like a sack of potatoes in the snow, and Thorfinn's like, gotta go rescue the guy I hate, sorry. So maybe not the best couple. And Canute's like, my date sucks. Man, so I want to turn this sound down and go through this episode because, Askeladd's just an attractive person. I'll just say that first and foremost. He's been attractive since day one. Him as a little kid, him as a teenager, just blessed with good looks. And his mom was beautiful. So, okay. Getting back to this episode and the bridge being destroyed, all that jazz. And the idea that Askeladd, I'm amazed that Askeladd stayed behind. He stayed behind. And I think that there's a part of him that was like, I can probably talk myself out of this and maybe get to where I'm held hostage and then they'll come back and get me. But I'm still amazed that, which he really didn't have much of a choice. It was like either they get out of there now and he doesn't go with them, or he tries to go with them and they stop the sled. So, I mean, he kind of did what he had to do, but I'm still amazed that Askeladd stayed behind. And Bjorn, I'm curious what Bjorn saw. If Bjorn like saw up ahead, like what was the deal? I still am a little confused by that, but if he saw Thorkell and them coming, or what the situation was. But man, so Askeladd, he lays it all out on the line. If you want to leave, then go wash your ass in the river and line up for Thorkell. Because yeah, Askeladd's like, look, you guys think that Thorkell's just going to let you guys come back into his ranks and join his crew? No, he's going to kill you. So either you join me or you get killed by him. What's it going to be? And they're like, we want, the only ass, I like that basically Thorgrim is like, the only ass that we want is Canute's. It's like, leave Canute out of this. Canute is being super quiet through all this. Like, he's still mulling things over. He's still, like, catatonic. I feel like Canute is, if you've ever watched Ferris Bueller's Day Off, there's the scene, I'm going to kind of spoil Ferris Bueller's Day Off, but there's a scene where a big traumatic episode happens to the character Cameron in that movie, and Cameron just like goes into a state of shock, and he's like riding along in the car and he's in a state of like catatonic shock, and that's Canute in this episode. Like, I thought he was gonna fall out of the sled before they got yeeted from it. I thought he was gonna just fall out, but that didn't happen. And so it's funny that Thorgrim and them, they offer Askeladd an out. They're like, just leave the prince here and disappear, and you don't have to die. Like, they're like, we've fought with you a long time, Askeladd. We're giving you something the Danes don't normally give, and that's a way out. So if you want, but it's like, they're warriors. So did he really think that Askeladd was going to choose the coward's way out? I don't think so. I think that was just to put on airs. It's like, he wasn't going to pick that. But so Thorfinn has been sitting there watching, and he looks over to Askeladd, and which is interesting because at the time I thought that Thorfinn was looking over at maybe Thorkell and his men, like, coming down the mountain towards them, but he could have been looking at Askeladd being like, what are you doing, old man? Like, get out of there. So I want to put on here, we have Askeladd. I'm going to bring this towards me here. We have Askeladd, and we have our boy Thorfinn. Because there's quite a few parallels between them, and they're really illuminated in this episode. So, and we have the idea of people that way back in like episode 8, I think, the concept of slavery, and everybody is a slave to something. And so, yeah, we see like they're just coming, like, while they're arguing and doing nothing, they're not moving, and Thorkell and his men are coming down the mountain. You know, they'll be coming down the mountain when they come, and there we go. And I thought that Thorfinn was watching that and being like, we're wasting time, but I think he was really like, come on, old man, what are we doing? And so then we have the flashback. I love flashbacks. Avalon. So Avalon, that is the name of a place in this episode called Servant. And so it's the name of heaven. So for Askeladd in his childhood, we have his childhood and him with his mother who was frail. Now that is kind of a parallel to Thorfinn, who during his childhood, his own mother, Helga, was quite frail. Now, Askeladd is clearly the only one taking care of his mom, and Thorfinn, his mom had lots of people taking care of her. So there is a distinction there, but both their mothers were kind of frailer in nature. But his mother talks to him about Avalon, which she equates to being basically this heaven, which is Vinland. That's essentially, it's describing Vinland, right? And it has this kind of like heaven connotation as well for Thorfinn. Like, his father tells him about Vinland being this great place where there's fertile lands and everything's fine. And Askeladd's mother talks about Avalon. It's the name of heaven. And I love, she's so beautiful. Our great ancestor, King Artorius, is over there. And Askeladd with his hair, like his little wavy hair, is like, oh. And so she says that King Artorius is healing there. Okay, and she's in the stables just like he said that his father kicked him out. And he's like, but Mom, King Artorius is a general from a long time ago. So it's funny that Askeladd, he applies reality to the story, which is funny because Thorfinn does the exact same thing with Thor's. Thorfinn applies reality. There's a moment for each of these characters in their childhood where they try to correct their parent and realize that their parent isn't exactly maybe telling the truth. Like when she talks about King Artorius healing in heaven, Askeladd's like, well, King Artorius was a general. He he was from a long time ago. What do you mean? And it's kind of like when Thor was trying to tell Thorfinn about, not using a sword unless you need to and trying to be nonviolent. And Thorfinn kind of calls him out and he's like, well, you fought in battle. So in both cases, both Thorfinn and Askeladd kind of call the parent out on reality, just in different ways. So that's interesting. But I like that he's like, is he still alive? And then she's just sitting there and she's like, Avalon. It lies far across the great sea to the west, like Vinland. It's a land of everlasting springs where the fairies live. So now there is a little bit of a difference here where she describes Avalon when he talked about in the last episode that the Celts believed in the ancient spirits. That's kind of like the fairies and stuff. And so she believes that too, which is funny because you have the concept of the fairies that are tied to like a spirituality. And then for the Danes, you have the idea of the Valkyries, which are kind of tied to the same thing. So it's interesting you see those parallels. And you see in the flashback, there's like the Roman columns and everything. So it's that culture and everything kind of blending in. It's a place free from the suffering of death and old age in this life. Which would be something she would cling to because she's suffering from pain too. He's recovering from his battle wounds there. And Askeladd just looks at her. Once his wounds have healed, King Artorius will come back for us. And it's so gross, like the mice and stuff getting in the food, like in the gruel and the flies, like it's just so nasty. Like it's clearly not a good environment at all to save us from our suffering. So in her mind, that King Artorius, that the king is going to save them from suffering. The funny thing about that is, and it doesn't really relate to Thorfinn, that's the one thing, but it does relate to Christianity because it's the idea of this king, this savior coming to free his people from suffering. Well, that kind of sounds like Jesus. It kind of sounds like, a Christian concept of Jesus saving his people from suffering. So it's a similar tie-in, which is funny because Askeladd does not seem religious. So that's curious, right? The parallels there are interesting. And then her reaching for his face. And he's such a cute little kid. When that happens, serve the king. Again, so that the idea, the concept of serve the king. And what Askeladd is a slave to. So to that concept, when that happens and he comes back, serve the king. Which is funny because that's the concept of Christianity, is like you serve your God, you serve Jesus, you serve the king. Yeah, that's it. And she says, serve the king. He is the true king and a warrior. So she says that he's a true king and a warrior. Okay, which would kind of align with what the Danes believe about being a warrior. And she says, become his staff and his sword someday. So by serving the king, become his staff and sword. And Askeladd says later in the episode, he's like, I just got tired of waiting. And I saw Canute and thought that maybe Canute could be like King Artorius. Maybe he could be. He looked at his face and said, maybe you will be the king that my mother was talking about. So I'll serve you. But I love that we just get Askeladd as an adult. Saying, can I talk to you before we say goodbye? And it's like at this point, he's like, I'm going to air all my grievances. I'm going to say that, hey guys, we've been friends for a long time. It's been real. It's been great. It's been really great. But to be honest, I've kind of hated you all the last decade. And so now I just want to get that off my chest before I leave you all. And I'm like, okay, he actually admitted it, which most of them are going to end up dying anyway, I'm sure. He's like, I never told you this before, but I actually hate all of you. So just wanted to let y'all know, clear the air, get that off my chest before I go. It's always like, it's not sudden backstory, but it's such a red flag for a character and a death flag when they air their grievances and they admit that they admit some secret about themselves to the general public. That's always like a death flag, because it's like Askeladd's putting it all out there, letting them know. I'm like, I don't want Askeladd to die. He's like the most interesting character in this show, and I don't want him to die, because I feel like there's still more he could do, and there's more we don't know about him and his character. You worthless Danes, you're worse than pigs. Yeah, they're like, oh, and they just chops their heads off! Like, Askeladd's just wasting no time. He's like, bye. And so, God. And so the concept that Askeladd, he's just done using these men. Like I said, he is ready to get out of there. But Thorfinn is not done with Askeladd. We'll talk more about that and what that means. But yeah. He's like, get the prince. And then, God, Bjorn, I love that Askeladd's just chopping everybody down. And he's like, Thorfinn whipping out the knives. I'm like, that was really badass and cool. But at the same time, Thorfinn, you're such a 17-year-old, because you probably should have like used like one at a time. Like he gets all of them out at once and just fires them all. And it's like, that's really cool. But you wasted your entire, like, you blew your load right at the start. Oh, an inexperienced youth. And then Bjorn, meanwhile, is like, hold on tight, kiddos. And he just knocks the shit out of that horse with that stick. I'm like, having worked with horses before, you don't have to hit them that hard with that big of a stick. Even though they're a big horse. Damn. I felt for that horse. That would hurt. Especially from Bjorn. And yeah, Thorgrim figures out that, yeah, they were on to him. And he sends those guys out to get him. And Askeladd just staying behind. And he just, damn. That man. And then going to the river, follow the sled. So yeah. So I am curious what Bjorn was looking at the beginning. Because he was looking like seeing something. But it doesn't matter. It's fine. But Askeladd gets left behind to deal with all these men by himself. And just shucks the coat off, ready to fight this whole crew. You didn't have enough faith. Meanwhile, Thorkell is like, what are they doing? Thorkell's face was like, it's like, I don't get it. What's going on? It's hilarious because I have a distant cousin who's like 6'6". He's like a giant of a man, and he's blonde, and he kind of reminds me of Thorkell a little bit. He has kind of like that big, loud, boisterous attitude like Thorkell. So now every time I see him on screen, I think of my cousin. I'm like, oh God. Like, yeah, he's just a big, just mountain of a man. Mm-hmm. And he's like, how dare they start fighting without me? Let me join. I love that Askir is like, just let him go. God, Thorkell is like a one-track mind. But Bjorn, like, taking off with them horses. And again, I do like the realism of this entire chase scene. That, yeah, realistically, these guys that are on single horses are going to be able to go faster than the carriage. So they're going to catch up. The carriage is pulling much more weight. Even though there's two horses, the physics of it, they're going to catch up. So I do appreciate that. And he's like, Thorfinn, kill him. And Thorfinn's like, I kind of ran out of my knives. And Bjorn's like, what was the point of bringing you? But then, this is the thing. Thorfinn says, damn, Askeladd's not here yet. Like, he's like, where is he? What is that baldy doing? He was expecting him to join them. So, that's so interesting. And these guys try to talk Bjorn. I like that the one guy, not Thorgrim, but the other guy, is it Alti? Alti's kind of like, he's like, come on, Thorfinn. He's like, come on, Bjorn. You know that we've caught up with you. You know that you could just give us the prince. Like, we don't have to kill you. It just depends on you, bud. Just come on to our side. It's fine. And then the other guy's like, Atli. He's like, Bjorn obeys Askeladd completely. He's not going to budge. We can't convince him. We'll just have to kill him. And Bjorn's like, well, glad you got the memo. Bjorn does not care that they think that he just blindly follows Askeladd. Because he doesn't blindly follow him. He believes in him. That's the scary thing. The scary thing is that he's saying, Askeladd trusts me. That's why he left the prince with me. Well, yeah. But he kind of didn't have a choice. His options were Willibald, the priest, and Thorfinn. Like, that's his options. He really didn't have a choice but to trust you, and he knew the entire rest of the crew were going to mutiny against him. So it's curious that Bjorn, I'll put Bjorn up here, that Bjorn talks about how Askeladd trusts him. But the reality is, Askeladd really doesn't have a choice. He's like, I'm trusting you, Bjorn, because you're the only option. It's that or leave Thorfinn in charge, and Thorfinn's a little edgelord. He isn't going to be much use. Askeladd did not think Thorfinn was going to come back for him, though. That's for sure. So, interestingly, I kept thinking Canute was going to fall off that sled. And he did not, but I kept thinking he was going to just slide right off into the snow and get trampled. So Bjorn, I should have seen that coming. Bjorn was like, hey, leave the horses alone. Why we gotta do this? Why you gotta axe the horse in the face? Not necessary. And then he's like, we're going to crash. And Thorfinn's like, oh God. I love that look on Thorfinn's face where he's like, oh shit. And then, yeah, this was, oof. Thorfinn, of course, being able to prepare, like, jumps off. But Canute and all them, they just get flung. They just get flung and knocked out. Meanwhile, Thorfinn he falls with style onto that horse and takes off to go get Askeladd. Surprise of the century. Meanwhile, I love the shot of Bjorn, like him looking up, his helmet's falling off. I love that shot of Bjorn. And he's got the Mario mushroom, baby. They're like, oh, you're alive, Bjorn? Oh God, he has the mushroom. It's great. Yep. Oh, that shot of Bjorn with his hair down and the blood coming off his hair. Great. It's a good shot. I would say it'd almost be the thumbnail, but no, we're sticking with blonde with this one. There's a good shot of Askeladd later on. But yeah, Thorfinn going back saying, damn. You put me through so much trouble, you baldy. I am so amazed he went back to get Askeladd. Which I shouldn't be surprised. But the idea that we talk about what we're a slave to, that Askeladd, he is a slave to, it's hard to describe simply. Askeladd, even what he's a quote-unquote slave to, is complicated. But he is a slave to, this is very paraphrasing, but his mother's culture. His mother's culture and words. He takes them, it's clear his mother has had an enormous impact on him. And that his mother is what he carried her across his back to her homeland. He went back to her people. He's fighting for his mother's people that he didn't even grow up with. And the stories that she tells are the reasons why he's doing the actions that he's doing. Like, he's risking his life to enact her words. And so he's kind of a slave to that. But he respects his mother so much, kind of like how Thorfinn respects his father so much. And Thorfinn is a slave to the revenge against Askeladd to the point where he is willing to leave everything to go back and save him so he can be the one to kill him. He's like, my entire life's purpose has been defined by you, Askeladd, and me trying to kill you and getting the opportunity to do so. I'll be damned if you're going to die by somebody else's hands. It's like, ah. And Askeladd didn't think he'd go back to get him. He's like, you're crazy. but Askeladd, when Thorgrim's like, why are you not acting like yourself? And part of me's arguing, well, no, he's actually acting his true self now, that he doesn't have to put on airs and pretend to like you all. But on the other hand, he's desperate because he finally has found someone in Canute that relates to what his mother was teaching him. And so and he's like, I'm getting old. This is my chance. So there is a desperation there, but it's funny how both him and Thorfinn are so desperate in this episode for totally different reasons. But it's kind of crazy. He's like, don't die until I kill you, Askeladd. And there's a part of me, now, do I think that Thorfinn, like, there's a weird kind of like Stockholm syndrome element to this. And I don't think that Thorfinn views Askeladd as a father figure at all. Quite the opposite. He views him as the destroyer of his father figure. But it's very odd in the weirdest way. It's almost like a Stockholm syndrome where he's kind of gotten attached to Askeladd, but it's very warped and twisted. He's attached to him in the sense that he wants to kill him, but he wants it to be him, nobody else. Nobody else gets to touch Askeladd except him. And it's like, it's fascinating, right? Meanwhile, Askeladd's killed like all these men. There's blood everywhere. And they're all like, and he's got his, now to be fair, the head wound I'm not so worried about, because it's like anytime you get cut on your head, it like bleeds everywhere, and it always looks worse than it actually is. So the head wound doesn't bother me. I'm like, oh, tis a scratch. You can walk that off, Askeladd. But the arrows are concerned. And he did get slashed across the arm, and he's just wore out. He's like, whoever thought that I'd be unable to escape from a mere 50 men one day. Like, Askeladd's like, I'm getting old. He's like over 50. He's like in his 50s fighting these guys off. And really the only cut he really has is on his shoulder, which is a problem, but it's more the fact, it's not the fact that he's cut, but it's the fact that he's just wore out. Like he's just exhausted because he's aged, right? He's not the young man he used to be. And he's like, and he's looking to see how many men are still left. And he's like, damn it. And then he sees, like, again, his mom touching his face. And seeing the mice and seeing her. And it almost looks like, if you look at that scene where there's like it looks like a ramp to like a manure pit or something, but it looks like a cross. It looks like a cross behind her. It's not, it's just it's the boards connecting, but it looks like a cross. And I feel like that's intentional, right? That there is, he revered his mother and thought she was so good. Mm-hmm. And then realizing that he's doing this for her. He's doing this. He's a slave to Canute and a slave to his job as a servant for her because of her words. And God, like, they all come at him, but this one guy, like, I know they're attacking him and it's in the heat of battle and everything. Like, the spears I get. Oh God, and him just like taking his eyes and gouging him out. Again, we've established Askeladd is not afraid to do anything to win. That does not concern him. He is willing to go the distance. But yeah, he's like, wait for it. Wait for your chance to escape. Like, he's just trying to hold him off. And this one guy, though, the one guy that attacked his armor with the axe, I was like, did you think that was going to do something? But in the heat of the moment in battle, you know, maybe he thought something. But the spears are what worried me the most. And he said, Thorkell is going to get here soon. It's going to be chaos. So he's like, he just wants to hold them off long enough. His plan was to hold them off long enough until Thorkell arrives, and then when it gets chaotic in the battle, then run away. Like, get out while you can. Like, he was trying to be smart and think about it. But yeah, but the axe hitting him, like, the vibrations, I guess, hurt him. But he's like, you bastard. And he just slit that man in half with the helmet. Oh my God. With that sword. So I'm like, is that sword special? And they're like, oh shit. Like, he's that strong, Askeladd is. God. But, again, I find it very ironic. That he gets the arrows fired into him. He gets the arrows fired very similar to Thor's. And again, Thorfinn has to see this father figure in the most warped, twisted ways get targeted by these arrows. It's like, what in the world? And then Askeladd, after he chopped a man in half, he goes, oh, I'm sorry, I was being loud. I was mad. I've calmed down since then. It's like, shit. He's like, I'm fine. Everything is great. I'm not mad anymore. Like, they're like, oh my God, Askeladd. And that's when they decide to fire the arrows. And he's like, they took out their flying toys. That line. And I was like, how is he going to deflect it? And he's like, come on, Torgrim. And so Askeladd's like, when Askeladd realizes he's up against the wall, he's like, look, why don't you just hold me hostage and then I can get you the prince? Like, he's just trying to save himself because he knows the arrows, he can't dodge those. And then it manages to work. He gets Thorgrim to agree to aim at his feet so he can't run away. But now he can't run away. So he's got one in his arm. He's got like 4 or 5 in his legs. So unless Thorfinn throws him on the back of his horse, Askeladd's not going anywhere. So, God. And the only way he's doing that now is if he fights and beats Thorkell. It's like, oh my God. Now the OP makes a lot of sense because Askeladd was, God, was trying to defend himself. Those arrows hitting him. He's like, are you going to take your prize to the grave with you? I love him like using the sword to stand up. I still have a lot of time where I can still work. Askeladd's like, miles to go before I sleep, right? Doing the Robert Frost thing, and he's like making himself stand up with all them arrows. Saying, I couldn't wait any longer. He couldn't wait for King Artorius to return home. That face that he makes that's probably gonna be the thumbnail, is of him with the blood and like the puff of air coming out, where he's like, I couldn't wait anymore for the true king to return from Avalon. He's like, I'm old. I wanted to do something and heed my mother's words, and I couldn't wait any longer, and that's why I've been desperate. And the Danes have no clue what he's talking about. They're like, what? And then Thorfinn coming up there and seeing Askeladd surrounded and just goes flying towards them. Like, just in a rage. I'm like, I can't believe Thorfinn, like, abandoned Canute, abandoned Willibald and Bjorn just to go back and get Askeladd. Like, Askeladd's abandoned him at every turn. Askeladd's been like, that kid, who cares? And Thorfinn's so driven by revenge that he won't let him go. God. And then I like Thorgrim's like, you don't make any sense. Let's just go ahead and kill him. Finish him off. And then the reveal of the arrows in the guy's back. I thought it was Thorfinn at first, but then I was like, how'd Thorfinn get the arrows? But no, it was Thorkell. Thorkell shows up. And I like that Thorkell seems to respect Askeladd. Or he seems to respect him, being like, okay, you're their leader. Man, they ganged up on you. That's really rough. I feel like he's the Avatar meme where he's like, that's rough, buddy. Like, like the Prince Zuko meme where he's like, man, that's rough, buddy. You got, Jod. Thorkell's like, you got, ambushed by your own men and they kind of beat up on you. That's not the warrior's way. That's cowardly. And so because of that, he decides to spare Askeladd and be like, well, you're a true warrior. These guys aren't. Let's kill them. And it's revealed just how cowardly they really are. He's like, come on, pick up your weapon and fight. You're going to die. Let's do it honorably so you can go to Valhalla. And it's funny to see just how cowardly they are. And all this talk, all this time, throughout this entire series, they've been going on and on through every battle about just how impressive it is for a man to go out fighting, to go out dying in battle, and how you'll get to Valhalla if you fight your way through it. And they've been on and on about that all season. But when they come to facing Thorkell, they're all a bunch of cowards. And they don't want to die and they don't want to fight to the death because they know they're going to lose. So it's funny. It's funny. Also, Thorkell, his expressions in this episode are absolutely ridiculous. Like, I just love that Thorkell... Bjorn's over here going all Super Mario and fighting. So he's going Super Mario on the men. Canute is surrounded. Willibald is MIA. Don't know. He got yeeted from the sled, so we don't know where he is. And then Thorkell. Thorkell decides for now to spare Askeladd. And it wasn't because of Thorfinn, because he had decided that. I genuinely think he just felt bad that he was ambushed by his own men and was like, you seem like a true warrior. I'm going to keep you around. But then he says to kill all the others. And Thorkell's expressions in this are they're just the craziest. Like, Torgrim is trying to talk himself out of it, right? And he's like, I just want you to listen to us. He's like, we were going to get you the prince. We kind of failed, but we're going to... And I love that Thorkell's like, what? Who are you? What are you talking about? Why do you want to talk to me? His expressions are just the most ridiculous. And I kept waiting. And he's like, he looks at the axe on the ground like, pick it up. Fight me. It's like, he's so simple. But I really thought that Torgrim was going to die, like, throughout this episode multiple times, and he probably still will, but not yet. And I like that Thorkell's like, come on, pick up the weapon. And he's like, the prince isn't here. And Thorkell's like, well, what's the point? He's like, oh, that's right. He's like, that's what I was going to talk to you about. Yeah. And Thorkell's like, he's like, we were planning on giving you the prince. And at this point, it seems like Thorkell doesn't care. He's like, but our leader Askeladd let him get away. And so Thorkell's like, oh, okay, I'm going to keep him around because he's their leader. He might be important to get the prince back. But he's like, the rest of y'all can die, so whatever. And yeah, he's just this tall man. And when he walked up to Askeladd, I'm sorry, but I'm glad he leaned down because when he walked up to Askeladd, like Askeladd's head and Thorkell's crotch were like right next to each other. I'm like, this is so uncomfortable, but thank goodness he crouched down. I was like, oh, thank God. I was like, good deal. But yeah, I love that Askeladd's like, God, you're terrifying. And Thorkell is just picking his nose. Doesn't care about Torgrim at all. He's like, I'm not paying attention. And then just leans down there, being as ominous as possible. And Askeladd's like, God, you're huge. God, I love it. It's great. And then he's like, you're Askeladd. It's like, you look pretty smart. So again, we talked way back in the London episode that Thorkell and Askeladd both seem like they are much more perceptive than they let on. Like, Thorkell is like a battle junkie. He's a jock. He's a Viking jock. He's the Viking equivalent, and he only cares about battling. He's basically Goku, but he is perceptive enough to kind of read between the lines and be like, you seem like the smart one of this group. So I might keep you around because you seem like somebody that'd be fun to battle when you don't have arrows in you. And then he's like, by the way, I don't see Thorfinn anywhere. He's like, where's your friend? Where's Thorfinn? He's the one I want to battle. He's like, did you kill him? And Askeladd's like, oh God, no, I didn't kill him. Not yet. He's like, I asked him to guard the prince. He's not part of this rebellion. And Thorkell's like, oh great, good. I'm relieved to hear that. I still want to fight him. Oh my God. So he's like, yep, we'll just keep you around. And that way, it's like, thanks for waiting, you dogs. God. And when he stands up, he looks kind of like, if I'm going to talk about him being like Goku. He's more like Broly, I guess. When he stands up, he's just such a mountain of a man. And then Torgrim's like, what? And he's like, except for Askeladd, kill them all. And then, so I'm guessing, did Torgrim die of fright or did he just pass out? That's what we don't know. So I'm like, Torgrim, he's either dead or unconscious. One of the two. But I thought maybe he like died of fright. I'd be like, oh my God. But then I love this, that they tell the men to pick up their weapons. They're like, you won't be able to go to Valhalla if you die without a weapon. Which, the funny thing is, Thor's didn't have a weapon when he died. It was just his fists. Well, he had a sword. No, he had a sword. So I guess maybe by that logic, Thor's did go to Valhalla. I guess by that logic, you could argue that. But he didn't fight with a sword. Not really. Well, he did against Askeladd, so I guess he did. But yeah, those guys like shaking as they bend down to pick up the axes and everything. And then running into battle. And God, that one guy just gets like speared through the neck. Oh, I've heard the manga is brutal. I could see that. I could very much see that. I've seen a panel of it. It reminds me of Attack on Titan. The art style does. It reminds me of Isayama's art style a little bit. It's very gritty and very, the line work is kind of like grittier. Then this makes it look very smooth and pretty. And Thorkell's just like, all right, cool. This is how it's supposed to be. Just one big old bloodsheddy battle. And Torgrim's like, well, now wait a minute. Are you sure? And he's like, here's your axe. Fight me now. And he like completely passes out. And he blames. I love that as he's backing up, Askeladd's like, man, it's rough for you. Like how the tables have turned. Askeladd's like, yeah, he's going to spare me. It sucks to be you. And then he's like, it's all your fault, Askeladd. God, this is great. I am curious about the little pin that Thorkell has on his jacket. It looks like a little leaf. I'm very curious if that's like a signal, a signal for something. Like if it's like a symbol of something, if it's just a little pin, what it's for. And he's like, just give up. You're going to die now. You're going to die without a doubt. Oh my God. And he just freaks out. And he's like, oh, this is no good. He's passed out. He's died where he's standing. Darn it, I put too much pressure on you. And he's just sitting there with the axe, like, tipping him and hitting him with it. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. And Askeladd just watching this bloody battle. Just watching everybody, like, rip themselves, like, just tear them to shreds. And it's so... I love that shot where he's just sitting there watching it, like, these guys are all just killing each other. He's like, we're not getting to Gainsborough. Canute is like, how are we getting Canute out of this? It's like he's just sitting there contemplating, like, how am I getting Canute out of this? What am I doing? How am I getting out of this situation? I'm probably going to die. I'm losing blood from the arrows. And then he's like, what's that? And he's like, oh. And it's like his knight in shining armor, but it's just... The thing about Thorfinn that I love in this episode is he is the OP shows him as a lone wolf, which is a great analogy. He is just a whirlwind of chaos. Thorfinn is not refined in any way, shape, or form. It's just him just like wobbling through the crowd on this horseback. Just flying through, like just kicking, the horse kicking, like he's just like in a frenzy. And Thorkell's like, what? And then, God, him just like charging ahead. And him yelling, Thorfinn looks so much older than he is there, like charging at him. And Thorkell's like, hey, Thorfinn, bestie! Oh my God! Askeladd's face is amazing. He's just like, are you freaking serious? What? And he's like, why? And then Thorfinn being so mad at Thorkell. I love Thorkell just like, God, him punching that horse. I thought he was going to punch the horse in the face. Because I was like, you've seen that in movies and stuff before. No, he fucking gut punches that horse. In the chest. No. Defying the laws of physics. I can't. But Askeladd's continued expression of just WTF is happening. I love Thorfinn just great. Thorfinn can fall with style. He is amazing at jumping off of things and landing gracefully. He can fall with style. But I just love Askeladd's like, what am I witnessing? I'm watching this giant of a man punch a horse. And the kid that hates my guts came to my rescue. What is happening? He's so dumbfounded. And then Thorfinn just sliding off like a damn cat. And he's like, hey, Thorfinn, you look like you've been doing well. God, you know who he reminds me of? I don't know if any of you ever watch Ace of the Diamond, but Thorkell reminds me of Amahisa Kosei. Like just that oblivious, blind optimism that's also like somewhat maniacal. Like that he gives off the same vibes. He gives off Amahisa Kosei vibes. So if you've not seen that series, you should watch it because it's great. It's about baseball. It's nothing to do like Vinland Saga, but the character of Amahisa Kosei, same vibes as Thorkell. Same vibes. If Amahisa Kosei was a Viking, this is how he would be. I just love Askeladd just sitting there leaning on a sword like, the fudge. And he's like, don't. Thorfinn did not come to be friends. Thorfinn's like, I did not come here to be friends with you. No. He's like, no, don't you touch Askeladd. No, he's my catch. If you lay a finger on him, killing. I like the phrase catch is interesting. It sounds like he was fishing and then he just caught Askeladd. So he says that Askeladd is his catch. Those of you that know Japanese and know the actual translation, is that a weird translation or is that pretty literal? I figure like, he doesn't say my prey or anything, which would be kind of weird, but my catch. I guess because they're from like a fishing town that maybe he's thinking, but Askeladd's like, what the fudge? He's like, got it, big guy. If you touch him, I'm going to kill you. Like, our wild-haired wolf boy is just like... And Askeladd's like, I'm sorry, but I knew you were crazy, but what? Askeladd's like, are you serious? You're risking your life against Thorkell because you want to kill me? But what? Like, Askeladd's just stunned. He's just stunned. A mouse picking a fight with a bear. Now, I don't think that's a fair analogy. I don't think that's fair. Askeladd, that's not fair. Thorkell is a bear, for sure. But I'm like, Thorfinn a mouse? Like, you've seen how deadly this kid is. You've seen how many people he's killed. I was thinking like, you know, like a wolf versus a bear. Or even if you wanted to demean Thorfinn a little bit, you could say coyote. Like a coyote versus a bear, but I don't think they have coyotes there. But a mouse, I feel like a mouse is not giving Thorfinn enough credit. But they want to build up the difference between the two of them. And Thorfinn, God, that face he makes. He's just so livid. Like Thorfinn is so mad at the prospect that Askeladd could die, and it's not because of him. Because that's, God, to show you just how much Thorfinn relies on his whole purpose for the last 11 years has been to follow Askeladd with the intent of being the one to kill him. But along the way, he's kind of like, it's the weirdest thing. It's the weirdest thing because I don't think that Thorfinn views Askeladd as a father figure. I do not. No, that's not what I'm saying. But it's almost like a subconscious Stockholm Syndrome thing where subconsciously Thorfinn he's followed Askeladd and been around Askeladd longer than his own father at this point by several years. So it's the weirdest thing where there's a part of Thorfinn that I think he expects Askeladd to always be there. Like he always expects to be following after him and chasing him. And now that there's the reality that may not be the case, that he may die by somebody else's hands, he's like, well, then what was the point of me following him for 11 years? I'm doing this to get revenge for my father, to get revenge for myself, mainly for himself. But he's like, if you die before I can do that, then what was the point of me wasting my life and not going back to my family? So the stakes for Thorfinn are pretty high here. Even though Askeladd's like, what are you doing? So, God, those expressions, though. And Thorkell's like, I don't get it, but your catch? He's like, isn't he your boss? And he's like, he's not my boss. He's like, no, like he's so livid. And then everybody's like, what the heck? What? And everybody's like, did you hear that? The kid said he's going to kill our captain. Like, and they're like, wow, he's got a lot. I like that in the middle of him, like, this one guy has this guy in a headlock and he's punching him. He's like, wow, Thorfinn's got a lot of guts to say that. Just, the humor in this show is so bizarre. It's so bizarre, but I love it. And he's like, give me Askeladd. If you don't, I'm going to kill you. And Thorkell's like, really? That's what I want to hear. He's like, then I'm not going to give him to you. You have to kill him. He's like, did you hear that, guys? Thorfinn and I just agreed to a duel. Oh, and that look, God, the edgelord look. His eyes, like, he's just so mad. A duel over Askeladd. You guys are the witnesses. And he's like, if you win, if you beat me, I'll give you a horse. I'll give you a horse. And then I love that Askeladd's like, how dare he have a duel over me? Askeladd's like, I didn't have any say in this. This is so great. Oh my God. And they're like, yeah, you can do it. There's like blood everywhere. There's bodies everywhere. These guys just stopped in the middle of a massacre to like cheer Askeladd, to cheer Thorfinn and Thorkell on. What? I mean, from the OP, I figured at some point Thorfinn and Thorkell were going to fight. Did not expect this to be the circumstance. Did not expect this to be the way that it went down. But yeah. He's like, fine. Yep. Thorfinn. It's like, if you win, then I'll let him go. I'll even give you a horse since I got punched yours. I'll let you go. And it's like, well, if you lose, you're going to die. So. And then I like that Thorfinn, in traditional 17-year-old fashion, he's like, this isn't going to be like in London. I'm like, I love that they've been holding this little grudge against one another for that long. And he's like, oh, I'm looking forward to that. Son of Thors. He keeps going back to like, you are the son of Thors. So it's curious. We talk about Askeladd and Thorkell's kind of parallels. Both Askeladd and Thorkell seem to revere and respect Thors a lot. And so they both kind of have this impression of Thors' son. And Askeladd kind of like thinks he's a brat, but Thorkell thinks he's a worthy warrior opponent. So I'm like Thorfinn, I want Askeladd to give Thorfinn advice from the sidelines. Be like, think about things. Like, I want him to give advice to him. The last in a line of warriors. So, interesting. Now, he says that, but he does not know that Thorfinn has a sister who, by this point, it's been 11 years. Hell, she could have a kid. She could have a little boy that is the next in line of Thor's legacy. We don't know that. But as far as Thorkell knows, as far as Thorkell knows, Thorfinn is the last in line of Thor's bloodline, as far as he knows. And so he thinks this will be a worthy testament to fight someone of that caliber, of that bloodline. God. And that's where the episode ends. What I really want to happen is for, as Thorfinn is fighting Thorkell, for Askeladd to be giving him advice from the sidelines. To be like, well, if you want to fight me to the death, then you gotta get rid of him. But I don't know if Thorfinn would listen, or if that would just distract him. The good news is with Thorkell, when Thorfinn last faced Askeladd, Askeladd does a lot of psychological manipulation, and he did that against Thorfinn because I think he knew that there was a chance he could lose against Thorfinn otherwise. Thorkell's just powerful, so I don't think there'll be the psychological aspect to fighting him, but at the same time, I think the downside of that is that Thorfinn is not as strong as Thorkell, so that's going to be a problem. And, I mean, both of them are at least at the top of their game, right? So, man. If you had told me at the beginning of this episode that it was going to end with Thorfinn having a duel with Thorkell over who would get Askeladd, I would have thought you were crazy, but... So, where we are at is that Thorfinn is about to fight Thorkell for Askeladd, who has been arrowed, and probably needs some medical attention, probably is bleeding out, may bleed to death before this is all over, we don't know. At least he's keeping the arrows in him. If he pulled them out, that'd probably make it worse, so there's that. Bjorn is in Super Mario mode and is fighting the other guys with the shroom. Canute, we don't know about him, Willibald. Maybe we'll touch base on the next episode, maybe not. And then, yeah. Meanwhile, Thorkell and his men are just watching this duel. And Torgrim may have died of shock, we don't know. I love the idea that we're getting more into Askeladd's past with his mother. I want to see her from that opening and see the whole thing with the snow and what that all is about. If we ever see anything like that, or if it's just metaphorical in the opening, don't tell me. We'll find out. But I do like the idea of Avalon and Vinland both representing the same thing to Thorfinn and Askeladd as children. That Askeladd and Thorfinn both have a reverence of their parents, and they seem to view them in a very idealized fashion. Askeladd views his mother extremely idealized, much like Thorfinn views his father. And it seems like that's not a bad assumption, because it seems like the people of Wales liked Askeladd's mother in the same way, just like people respect Thor's in the same way from knowing him. So there is a cool connection there. But the idea that Askeladd is... his mother tells him to serve the king, the true king and warrior, right? And it almost kind of seems like maybe by that logic, he was always looking for... I feel like Askeladd kind of knew that his mother was kind of making part of it up, like King Artorius was not... he was dead. He's not coming back, right? But that maybe Askeladd spent his whole life trying to find what his mother would call King Artorius and to serve him. That he's always been looking for someone to serve and to fulfill his mother's request of him. And so when he met Thor's, he was like, oh, you're like the King Artorius my mother talked about, so I could serve you. Didn't work out. So now he has Canute, and he's like, you could work. And so he's trying to make it to where his whole desperation and everything makes a lot more sense, because he's trying to fit this mold that his mother has asked him to serve for. And we're just not there yet. So it's interesting. The parallels between them are interesting. I'm curious how this... I'm curious how this is going to go down, because I'm like, Askeladd and Thorfinn are kind of our protagonists, our main characters. So, in a sense, you think, well, Thorfinn has to win because otherwise he's going to die. But there's other factors. So it's like, so there's a lot of things that could happen, okay? So either we've got a lot of things that could happen. So either Thorfinn loses and dies, which I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think Thorfinn's going to die in this series. Either Thorfinn wins and kills Thorkell and takes Askeladd, which could happen. That seems like a pipe dream, but it could happen. Or could it be that Thorfinn and Thorkell are in a draw, and then Bjorn comes to get them? That could happen. I could see them both battling, and it ends up being like a draw, and Bjorn comes in at the last minute and scoops them on up, and is like, let's go. But they don't have a sled anymore, so it's like, what are they going to do? Which they could still have the horses, I guess. One of the horses, they only cut the one. So I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work. Or the battle, the Thorfinn battle, will be interrupted and no one wins. I don't know. I could also see maybe Askeladd, like, saving up his strength, and when Thorfinn is about to die, Askeladd, like, deals a blow to Thorkell or something. I don't know. Honestly, you think that, okay, well, Thorfinn has to win because he's the protagonist, but that's not necessarily the case. It may become a draw, or maybe Bjorn or Canute or one of them grabs Thorfinn and leaves, or maybe they get him and Askeladd and goes. I don't know how this is going to go. It could go a lot of different directions. The only thing I don't think is going to happen is that Thorfinn's going to die. I don't think Thorfinn's going to die. He's like one of our main characters. I feel like we're going to be following him and or Askeladd for a while. Askeladd could die. I don't want him to, but he could. But I don't think Thorfinn's going to die, but everything else is kind of on the table. So I'm like, I don't think I'm going to be able to wait a week to watch episode 18. Mm-mm. And so now we've set up the final act, which is funny because I don't know. We have 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. We have 7 episodes left. I don't foresee the duel lasting longer than an episode, but we may spend part of the next episode figuring out what's going on with Bjorn and Canute and Willibald and dealing with them. That could be a chunk of the episode. And then I could see maybe a chunk of the episode being the battle, and then going into episode 19, we see the end of the duel. But that still leaves us with like 5 to 6 episodes for this season of what's going to happen. Are they going to make it to Gainsborough? What's going to happen with Canute? With Askeladd, is he going to die? I don't know. But we're having this duel next episode. Why not? We're starting the 3rd act and see what's all going to go down. So I'm so curious, but I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm very curious to know your thoughts down below. But I hope y'all enjoyed this reaction and discussion. But I'm going to be curious to see what y'all say. Please no spoilers. But I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. And yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Vinland Saga. Bye.